On the morning of October 6, 1789, a mob of 7,000 angry Parisians armed with pikes, muskets, and kitchen knives stormed through the golden gates of the Palace of Versailles. Within hours, two royal bodyguards would be decapitated, their severed heads mounted on pikes, and paraded through the halls where kings once danced. The Queen of France would be running barefoot through a secret passage built into the palace walls, seconds away from being torn apart by a crowd screaming for her blood. The only thing that saved her life that morning was a door. Not just any door. A hidden door, disguised as part of the ornate wood paneling in her bedroom. A door so cleverly concealed that most visitors to Versailles today walk past it without knowing it exists. A door that opened to a dim, narrow corridor that led to safety. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. That secret escape route wasn't built for emergencies. It was built for pleasure, for scandal, for a queen who wanted to slip away from the suffocating rituals of court life and into the arms of forbidden lovers. This is the story of Marie Antoinette's secret escape room. And by the time you understand why it was built, you'll realize that the mob wasn't just coming for a queen. They were coming for everything that door represented. Our story begins in 1770, when a 14-year-old Austrian princess named Maria Antonia stepped out of a carriage at the border between Austria and France. She was met by French officials who had very specific instructions. Strip her naked, every piece of clothing, every jewel, every ribbon in her hair, everything Austrian had to be removed before she could enter France. She stood there, a terrified teenager, as strange men dressed her in French garments and even changed her name. From that moment, she would be Marie Antoinette, the future Queen of France. The marriage had been arranged to seal an alliance between Austria and France, two nations that had been enemies for centuries. Marie Antoinette's mother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, had 16 children and used them all like chess pieces on the board of European politics. Marie Antoinette was the youngest daughter, the expendable one. Pretty enough, charming enough, useful enough to cement a treaty. On May 16, 1770, in the Royal Chapel at Versailles, 15-year-old Marie Antoinette married the 15-year-old Dauphin Louis Auguste, the future King Louis XVI. The ceremony was magnificent. Her wedding dress was made from cloth of silver and covered in diamonds, gifts from her mother. 57 carriages, 117 footmen, and 376 horses had accompanied her from Austria. The cost of the wedding festivities alone could have fed thousands of starving French families for a year. But here's where the fairy tale turns dark. That night in the royal bedchamber, with officials standing outside the door ready to verify the consummation of the marriage, nothing happened. Not that night, not the next night, not for 7 years. Louis XVI suffered from a condition called phimosis, a painful tightness that made intercourse excruciating. But more than that, he was awkward, overweight, obsessed with making locks and hunting, and completely uninterested in his beautiful young wife. Marie Antoinette, who had been raised in the sophisticated court of Vienna, found herself married to a man who would rather fix a clock than look at her. Court records show that Louis told his grandfather, King Louis XV, that he had attempted to consummate the marriage, but was always stopped by painful sensations. Imagine being 14 years old, married to a stranger, living in a palace where every single move you make is watched, where courtiers stare at you when you eat breakfast, where 100 people stand in your bedroom to watch you get it dressed and your husband won't touch you. That was Marie Antoinette's life, and it drove her slowly insane. The Palace of Versailles was not designed for privacy. It was designed to be a prison. King Louis XIV, who built Versailles, had a very specific plan. He forced every powerful noble in France to abandon their estates and live at Versailles under his watchful eye. If you wanted power, you had to be at court. If you were at court, you were under surveillance every moment of every day. The nobles competed for the honor of watching the king take his morning toilet. They fought for the privilege of holding his shirt while he dressed. This wasn't about luxury. This was about control. By the time Marie Antoinette arrived, Versailles housed 10,000 people. Servants, nobles, courtiers, guards, all crammed into a palace that had been built with astonishing beauty, but shocking practical flaws. There was not a single bathroom in the entire palace. Let me repeat that. The most expensive, most magnificent palace in Europe, which cost the equivalent of $2 billion to build in today's money, did not have bathrooms. People urinated in corners, in stairwells, behind curtains. Courtiers carried chamber pots that they emptied out windows. The stench was so overwhelming that visitors reported being nauseated from the smell. To combat this, everyone at Versailles wore heavy perfume, gallons of it. The Queen herself went through enormous quantities of rose water and orange blossom perfume, trying to mask the fact that she lived in what was essentially a gilded toilet. Marie Antoinette was suffocating. The rituals were endless and humiliating. When she woke up in the morning, she couldn't just get dressed. First, the Lady of Honor had to be summoned. Then, if a princess of the blood royal arrived, the honor of handing the Queen her chemise had to be transferred. If a duchess arrived during that transfer, the whole process had to start over. Sometimes Marie Antoinette stood there naked for 20 minutes while courtiers argued about whose rank gave them the right to hand her underwear. She once stood shivering in the freezing room, completely nude, while this ridiculous ceremony played out, and when someone finally brought her chemise, she grabbed it and put it on herself, breaking protocol and shocking everyone present. When she ate, people watched. Hundreds of courtiers were allowed to file through and stare at the Queen chewing her food. When she played cards, crowds gathered. When she walked in the gardens, she was followed. There was no escape, except there was. Somewhere around 1774, when Louis XV died, and Marie Antoinette became Queen of France at 19 years old, she made a decision. She commissioned architects to build her a secret world. It started with private rooms, tucked behind doors disguised as bookcases, hidden behind wood panels that looked exactly like the walls. Marie Antoinette created a series of private apartments where the suffocating rules of Versailles didn't apply. The most famous of these was the hidden door in her state bedroom. If you visit Versailles today and stand in the Queen's bedroom, looking at the massive bed with its gold-embroidered curtains, you might notice something strange on the left side of the room. There's a section of the wall covered in ornate wooden panels carved with intricate designs. It looks like decoration. It's actually a door. A mechanism hidden in the carving allows the panel to swing open, revealing a narrow passage that leads to a private staircase. That staircase goes up to the second floor, where Marie Antoinette had created her real sanctuary. These weren't official state rooms. They were hers. A library where she could read without an audience. A sitting room with silk curtains and furniture she chose herself. A billiard room where she could play games. And most importantly, a small apartment where she could meet people in private, no guards standing 3 feet away, no courtiers taking notes, just her and whoever she invited through that secret door. But that wasn't enough. Marie Antoinette wanted more than hidden rooms in the palace. She wanted an escape from the palace entirely. In 1774, her husband gave her the Petit Trianon, a small chateau on the grounds of Versailles. It's about a 15-minute walk from the main palace, surrounded by gardens and far enough away to feel like a different world. This became her obsession. She spent a fortune renovating it. Exact accounts from 1785 show she owed 258,000 livres to 59 different individuals and groups just for her wardrobe expenses that year alone. That's roughly $3.5 million annually for clothes in today's money, though she often spent double that amount. At the Petit Trianon, she created an English garden, a theater, and, most famously, the Queen's Hamlet, a fake village with thatched roof cottages where she and her ladies-in-waiting could play at being shepherdesses. People today look at paintings of Marie Antoinette dressed as a milkmaid and think it's charming. The French people at the time found it obscene. While peasants were starving, while bread prices were climbing so high that families couldn't afford to eat, the Queen of France was spending the equivalent of millions building a fake farm where she could pretend to milk cows. The cows, by the way, were washed and perfumed before she touched them. But the Petit Trianon wasn't just about playing in gardens. It was where Marie Antoinette entertained the man she truly loved. His name was Axel von Fersen, a Swedish count and diplomat. They met at a masked ball in Paris when they were both 18 years old. He was devastatingly handsome, charming, intelligent, and he made Marie Antoinette feel what her husband never could. Desire. Evidence of their affair is controversial among historians, but recent discoveries of letters between them, some with words deliberately scratched out by censors, strongly suggest they were lovers. They met at 18, and their relationship continued until she died at 37. For nearly 20 years, through secret doors and hidden passageways, Marie Antoinette carried on a relationship with the one man who seems to have genuinely cared about her as a person, not as a queen. At the Petit Trianon, she could receive Fersen privately. The secret staircases known only to her most trusted servants led directly to her private rooms. Historians have documented that Fersen had access to these apartments and that the queen would spend hours with him, away from the prying eyes of court. The French people knew. Rumors spread. Pamphlets were printed accusing the queen of being a whore, of having children by Fersen instead of by the king. Some historians believe that at least one of her children was fathered by Fersen, not by Louis. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Meanwhile, her marriage to Louis finally got consummated in 1777, 7 years after the wedding. Marie Antoinette's brother, Emperor Joseph II of Austria, came to visit and apparently had a very frank conversation with Louis about what needed to happen. Shortly after that conversation, the marriage was finally completed. Whether Louis had surgery for his phimosis or whether Joseph just gave him a very direct anatomy lesson remains unclear. What's clear is that Marie Antoinette was pregnant within months. She had 4 children: Marie Therese, born in 1778, Louis Joseph, born in 1781, who died at age 7 from tuberculosis, Louis Charles, born in 1785, who would later die in prison at age 10, and Sophie, born in 1786, who died at 11 months old. Only Marie Therese would survive the Revolution. But by 1785, something happened that would destroy whatever was left of Marie Antoinette's reputation: the affair of the diamond necklace. This scandal was so convoluted and so damaging that it essentially guaranteed the queen would eventually lose her head. Here's what happened. A con woman named Jeanne de la Motte convinced Cardinal de Rohan that Queen Marie Antoinette secretly wanted to buy an extravagant diamond necklace worth 1.6 million livres, approximately $14 million today. The cardinal, desperate to regain the queen's favor after offending her years earlier, agreed to act as an intermediary. Jean even arranged a meeting in the gardens of Versailles at night where the cardinal met a woman he believed was the queen. It was actually a prostitute dressed up to look like Marie Antoinette. The cardinal signed for the necklace in the queen's name. Jean took possession of it and immediately broke it up, selling the diamonds piece by piece. When the jewelers came to Marie Antoinette demanding payment, she had no idea what they were talking about. She had never wanted the necklace. She had never met with the cardinal. She had never authorized any purchase. The trial that followed was a public spectacle. The cardinal was eventually acquitted. Jean was convicted and branded with a hot iron, marking her as a thief. But the damage to Marie Antoinette was catastrophic. Even though she was the victim of the fraud, the public believed she was somehow involved. Pamphlets circulated showing her in obscene poses, accusing her of theft, of selling France's treasures to fund her lavish lifestyle. The people had found their villain, and they called her Madame Deficit. The truth was more complicated. Yes, Marie Antoinette spent enormous amounts of money on clothes, jewelry, gambling, and her estates. Her annual clothing allowance was $3.6 million, and she routinely spent double that. She once lost the equivalent of thousands of dollars in a single night of gambling. But her spending, while extravagant, was a tiny fraction of France's financial problems. The real bankruptcy came from France's wars, particularly the support France gave to the American Revolution. That cost exponentially more than anything Marie Antoinette ever spent. But facts didn't matter. The people needed someone to blame, and the Austrian woman with her secret estate and her hidden doors became the symbol of everything wrong with France. By 1789, France was collapsing. Bread prices had skyrocketed. The government was bankrupt. King Louis tried to raise taxes on the nobility, but they refused. He called the Estates General, a meeting of representatives from the clergy, nobility, and common people, for the first time in 175 years. It was supposed to solve the financial crisis. Instead, It sparked a revolution. On July 14, 1780, a mob stormed the Bastille prison in Paris. The French Revolution had begun. At Versailles, the royal family tried to continue as normal, but everyone knew something terrible was coming. Marie Antoinette, who had once been the carefree queen playing shepherdess, was now a mother terrified for her children's lives. October 5, 1789. It was raining in Paris. Bread was scarce, and the price had become impossible for most people to afford. In the markets, women who had spent the morning searching desperately for food began to gather. They were angry, they were hungry, and they decided to do something about it. Around 10,000 people, mostly women, began marching from Paris to Versailles. It was a walk of roughly 12 miles, and they were armed. Kitchen knives, scythes, a few had muskets, some dragged cannons. They marched through the rain chanting and singing, demanding bread, and demanding the king and queen come back to Paris where they could be watched. At Versailles, panic set in as word reached the palace that a massive mob was approaching. King Louis was out hunting when the crowd arrived at around 5:30 in the evening. By the time he returned, thousands of people had surrounded the palace. Lafayette, the general who had helped America win its revolution, arrived with more troops, supposedly to keep order, but actually sympathetic to the revolutionaries. All night, the mob waited outside. Some got inside and occupied the National Assembly meeting hall. The king met with a delegation of women who demanded bread and reforms. He agreed to everything they asked, but that wasn't enough. The crowd wanted blood. At dawn on October 6th, the real horror began. A group of men in the mob found an unlocked gate. They rushed into the palace and headed straight for the queen's apartments. 2 royal bodyguards tried to stop them. The mob beat them savagely and then, in a frenzy of violence, beheaded them both. They mounted the heads on pikes. Marie Antoinette was asleep in her bedroom. She woke to the sound of screaming and musket fire. Her guards were shouting that the mob had broken through. They were coming for her. They wanted to kill her. She could hear them in the hallway, getting closer, shouting that they would cut off her head and parade it through the streets. She ran. She was wearing only a thin nightgown and no shoes. She ran to the hidden door on the left side of her bedroom, the door disguised as wood paneling. The secret passage she had used for years to slip away to her private rooms, to meet lovers, to escape the suffocating rituals of court. Now she used it to escape death. She pushed through the mechanism that opened the door and ran barefoot up the narrow staircase. Behind her, the mob burst into her bedroom. They tore apart the bed, slashing the mattress with knives, convinced they would find her there. They were seconds behind her. If that door hadn't been there, if she had hesitated even a moment, she would have been murdered that morning. She ran through the hidden corridors to the king's apartments. The king, meanwhile, was running through other passages trying to reach her. They finally found each other in a small room and held each other, both shaking with terror. Outside, the crowd was screaming for their deaths. Lafayette managed to restore some order. He convinced Marie Antoinette to step out onto the balcony and face the mob. It was one of the most dangerous moments of her life. She stood there, visible to thousands of people who hated her, any one of whom could have had a musket aimed at her heart. Someone in the crowd shouted that she should bring her children. She did. She stood on the balcony with her son and daughter, facing people who wanted to kill her. Lafayette bowed and kissed her hand, a gesture of respect that momentarily calmed the crowd. But then the chanting started again. To Paris! To Paris! The royal family had no choice. They were prisoners now, though no one said it explicitly. The royal family was forced into a carriage and driven back to Paris, surrounded by the mob. The severed heads of the 2 bodyguards were carried on pikes at the front of the procession. People cheered. They had captured the king and queen. The women of Paris had succeeded where armies had failed. From October 1789 until June 1791, the royal family lived under house arrest in the Tuileries Palace in Paris. Marie Antoinette, who had spent years building secret escape routes, now planned the biggest escape of all. The flight to Varennes. The plan was organized mainly by Axel von Fersen, her Swedish lover. He arranged for a large carriage disguised as a common vehicle to wait outside Paris. The royal family would slip out in the middle of the night and travel to the border where loyal troops would be waiting to protect them. From there, they could escape to Austria or rally loyalist forces. On the night of June 20th, 1791. The escape began. Marie Antoinette disguised herself as a governess. The king dressed as a servant. They made it out of the palace and into the waiting carriage. For hours, as they rode through the French countryside, it seemed like the plan might actually work. But someone recognized the king. At a small town called Varennes, about 40 kilometers from the border, a local official spotted Louis and raised the alarm. The carriage was stopped. The royal family was arrested and brought back to Paris in humiliation. This time there was no pretense. They were prisoners. The failed escape changed everything. Before Varennes, many French people still believed Louis could be a constitutional monarch. That reform was possible. After Varennes, it became clear the king wanted to flee the country and bring back foreign armies to crush the revolution. Trust was shattered. For more than a year, the royal family lived in terror. The revolution grew more radical. On August 10th, 1792, a mob attacked the Tuileries Palace. More than 600 Swiss guards defending the palace were killed, many massacred after they surrendered. The royal family fled to the National Assembly for protection, but they were no longer protected. They were officially prisoners. They were moved to the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris. The conditions were tolerable at first. The family had rooms and servants, but gradually things got worse. Louis was separated from his wife and children and held on a different floor. Marie Antoinette could hear his footsteps above her but couldn't see him. On January 21st, 1793, King Louis XVI was executed by guillotine. Marie Antoinette heard the cannons fire announcing his death. Her husband of 23 years, the awkward man who couldn't consummate their marriage for 7 years, the father of her children, was dead. She was now called the Widow Capet, stripped of her title as queen. On the night of August 2nd, 1793, guards came and took her son, 8-year-old Louis Charles, from her arms. She fought them desperately, screaming and clinging to him, but they tore him away. She would never see him again. The boy was given to a brutal guard who physically and psychologically tortured him. They forced him to say obscene things about his mother. They made him sign documents claiming she had sexually abused him. The child, terrified and abused, did whatever they demanded. Marie Antoinette was moved to the Conciergerie prison, the final stop before execution. Her cell was cold, damp, and barely large enough to stand in. Guards watched her constantly, never giving her a moment of privacy. The noise from other prisoners echoed through the stone corridors. She was prisoner number 280, no longer a queen, just a number. On October 14, 1793, her trial began. It was a mockery of justice. The charges against her included treason, conspiring with foreign powers, depleting the nation's finances, and most horrifically, incest with her own son. The Revolutionary Tribunal brought in her 8-year-old boy, coached to repeat vile accusations against his mother. When the prosecutor asked her to respond to the charge of incest, Marie Antoinette stood and said something remarkable. She refused to answer such an obscene accusation because, she said, nature itself would refuse such a charge. She appealed to every mother in the courtroom, asking if any mother could believe such a thing. Even the hardened revolutionaries in the room were momentarily moved by her dignity. But the verdict was never in doubt. At 4 in the morning on October 16, 1793, she was found guilty of all charges. The sentence was death by guillotine. They cut her hair short. They tied her hands behind her back. They put her in an open cart, not the closed carriage given to the king, but an open cart like a common criminal, so everyone could see her and jeer. She wore a simple white dress. Her hair, once piled high with feathers and jewels, was now white and thin from stress. She was 37 years old, but looked ancient. The cart rumbled through the streets of Paris. Crowds lined the route, some silent, some cheering, some shouting insults. She sat perfectly straight, her face expressionless. She had learned long ago at Versailles how to maintain composure in front of an audience. This was her final performance. At the Place de la Révolution, the guillotine waited. She climbed the steps to the scaffold. Her last words came when she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. "Pardon me, sir," she said. "I did not do it on purpose." Even at the moment of her death, the etiquette drilled into her at Versailles remained. The blade fell at 12:15 in the afternoon on October 16, 1793. The executioner held up her severed head to the crowd. Some people cheered, some wept. The woman who had once been the most powerful queen in Europe was dead. Her body was dumped in an unmarked grave. Her son, Louis Charles, died in prison in 1795 at age 10, probably from tuberculosis and neglect, though some say from the brutal treatment he received. Her daughter, Marie Therese, was the only member of the immediate family to survive. She was released from prison in 1795 and lived in exile. She never had children, and she died in 1851, 58 years after her mother's execution. The Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's private escape, was nearly destroyed during the Revolution. The revolutionary government considered tearing it down entirely as a symbol of royal excess. The Queen's Hamlet was divided up to be sold as individual plots, but somehow it survived. Napoleon restored it for his second wife. Later rulers maintained it. Today it's open to the public as part of the Versailles estate, and tourists walk through rooms that were once Marie Antoinette's most private sanctuary. The secret door in the Queen's bedroom is still there. If you take a tour of Versailles and know where to look, you can see it. It's on the left side of the bed, disguised as wood paneling. Most visitors walk right past it without knowing what it is. But it's there, a reminder of the night a queen ran for her life through a passage built for pleasure and scandal. Historians still debate Marie Antoinette. Was she a villain who bankrupted France with her extravagance, or a victim of circumstance, blamed for problems far beyond her control? The truth, as always, is complicated. She did spend enormous amounts of money on trivial things while people starved. She did live in spectacular luxury while showing little understanding of common people's suffering. But she was also a pawn, married at 14 to seal a political treaty, trapped in a suffocating palace, mocked and vilified for circumstances she didn't create. The secret escape room tells both stories. It was built because a young woman couldn't breathe under the weight of being queen, because she needed somewhere to be herself, to read, to love, to escape the endless scrutiny. But it was also built with money that could have fed thousands, maintained by servants who were themselves starving, used for affairs that scandalized a nation already drowning in anger. On that October morning in 1789, when Marie Antoinette ran through that secret door with a mob seconds behind her, she wasn't just escaping death. She was escaping the consequences of a system built on hidden doors and secret privileges. A system where the powerful could slip away into private worlds while everyone else suffered in public view. The door saved her life that day. But it couldn't save her forever. 3 years later, there were no more secret doors to run through. No more hidden passages to safety. Just a cart, a scaffold, and a blade. Today, if you visit Versailles, you can stand in the Queen's bedroom and look at that door. You can see the narrow staircase beyond it, the dim corridor where a barefoot queen once ran for her life. You can walk through the Petit Trianon and see the rooms where she entertained her lover and played at being a shepherdess. You can visit the conciergerie in Paris and see a recreation of the cell where she spent her final days. But here's what you can't see. You can't see the terror on her face as she heard the mob breaking through her guards. You can't hear the sound of her footsteps on the stone stairs as she ran. You can't feel the moment when she realized that all her secret doors, all her hidden passages, all the escapes she had built over years of suffocation would only delay the inevitable. Because Marie Antoinette's real tragedy wasn't that she died. Plenty of people died in the Revolution, many of them more innocent than she was. Her tragedy was that she never understood until it was far too late that you cannot build secret doors when your entire society is collapsing. You cannot hide in private palaces when people are starving. You cannot escape into fantasy villages when reality is burning down around you. The secret escape room at Versailles is beautiful. The hidden door is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. The private apartments are exquisite. But they represent something far darker than architecture. They represent the final desperate attempts of a dying aristocracy to preserve private luxury in a world demanding public justice. That door saved Marie Antoinette on October 6, 1789. But it couldn't save the world she represented. That world, with all its secret doors and hidden privileges, died with her on the scaffold. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the door is still there. Not as a tribute to clever engineering or romantic escapes, but as a reminder that sometimes the exits we build to save ourselves are really just postponing the inevitable reckoning. If you want to understand the French Revolution, go to Versailles, stand in the Queen's bedroom, look for the secret door on the left side, and ask yourself what you would have done. Would you have used that door to run? Or would you have faced the mob and tried to answer for centuries of hidden privileges and secret escapes? Marie Antoinette ran, and 3 years later there was nowhere left to run.